The topic of discussion, defense. The focus of the discussion, you, and what you can do to build a good defense to protect yourself. Hi, and welcome to Red Evony. I am Akayasha. You can call me Aka. Before we carry on, let me show you my credentials. And yes, I've got the standard stuff. BSc, PhD, OMG, but I'm going to show you some battle reports. Now, these are from Battlefield, so these are solo defenses. And here's the first one. Decent power exchange. The opponent had a level 40 general, so quite good. Here's another one. Almost 100 on the power exchange. Level 39 Simeon. Again, not too bad. Here's a third one. Defense against ground. Power exchange was quite good because the opponent didn't include subs. So, while I'm not trying to claim that I'm the crowned prince of defense, I do know a thing or two, and I'm going to share some of that with you. Now, the information in this video is based on my best knowledge right now, and my experience so far. So please, if you have any differing views with any of the information presented here, feel free to drop a comment down below. Okay, now that we've got the disclaimer out of the way, what do you need to build a good defense in Evony? Putting it simply, there are three main ingredients you need for building a good defense. Buffs, debuffs, and troops. And we're going to touch on each of these. The first one we're going to look at, buffs. Here, we are talking about your troop buffs on defense. Your buffs will determine how strong your troops are on defense and how well you match up against the person that is attacking you. In most cases, the attacker will have higher buffs for the troop type they are attacking with than you will on defense. And if they don't, well, that's great for you. So, you will want to make sure that your buffs are as high as you can get them so you close the gap between you and the attacker. Your buffs on defense will come primarily from your wall general, your assistant general, and universal buffs like research and other key buffs. I've made a video covering how to increase your buffs, and if you haven't seen it, check it out after this video. The link is in the description. So, what do you focus on when it comes to buffs for defense? The simple answer is everything. You want all your troop buffs to be as high as they possibly can. Depending on the composition of the army you are building, you might want to focus more on buffs for a specific troop type. For example, mounted, siege. That aside, irrespective of whatever troops you're focusing on buffing, it is very important that you do not neglect buffing up your ground troops. So that means ground attack, ground defense, ground HP. While I will not say that ground troops are the most important thing for you to focus on, ground troops play a vital role when it comes to protecting your keep. Especially if you're a smaller player, and these days being a smaller player means being 2 billion and below, having strong ground troops will definitely save you when it comes to defense. So be sure not to neglect them. Moving on, debuffs are the next main ingredient needed. And in a lot of cases, debuffs are just as important, if not more important than buffs, when it comes to building a good defense. Your debuffs will come primarily from universal buffs, such as research, and buffs from your sub-cities. That's your sub-city mayors and debuff gear. One of the major issues that a lot of players have is that from the start of the game, we are all trained to focus on increasing our buffs, be that mounted troop buffs or ranged troop buffs. So, it's a bit hard for a lot of people to realize later on the importance of having good debuffs. If your focus is on building a strong defense, it is very important that you pay significant attention to increasing your debuffs. Now, with that said, what do you focus on when it comes to debuffs? The answer? Your primary focus should be on attack debuffs, the most important of which will be ranged troop attack debuffs. Attack debuffs for other troop types like siege, which are incredibly easy to get, and mounted troops are fairly easy to come by. However, in my opinion, after focusing on range attack debuffs, it is very, very important for you to focus on ground attack debuffs. Ground attack is one of the hardest stats in Evony to debuff, so any opportunity you get to improve your ground attack debuffs, you need to take full advantage of it. I've made a video covering how to increase your debuffs, and if you haven't seen it yet, check it out after this video. The link is in the description. Regarding having a specific focus or reference point when it comes to debuffs, if you are able to get any of your debuff stats up to 400%, you're in good shape. You'll still have work to do on improving your debuffs, but at this point, by no means will you be a pushover. If you're liking the content that we've covered so far, do remember to give the video a like. But hang on, because we're not quite done yet. Next up, troops. Your troops are the final ingredient needed for building a good defense. When it comes to troops, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, the type of troops. Here, all troop types, again, all troop types are important when it comes to defense, and each of them have their unique roles to play. Siege and ranged troops are important for long distance attacking. Mounted troops are important for protecting against ground troop attacks, and ground troops are important for protecting against ranged troop attacks. So, you will want all troop types available when you're on defense. The next thing we're going to talk about are troop tiers. The tier of troops you have is also important when it comes to defense. For example, it is considerably harder to defend against an attack that has T14s when your highest troop tier is T12. So just keep that in mind. While you would likely have other reasons for wanting to unlock higher tier troops, building a good defense is yet another reason to focus on unlocking higher troop tiers. The next thing we're going to talk about, troop distribution. Your troop distribution in your top tiers is also an important factor when it comes to defense. Now, just to be clear, there is no definitive way of distributing your troops. However, what you could follow as a guide is you would typically want to have more T12, followed by T13, and then finally T14. This kind of distribution also helps with the power exchange. And that's because T14s tend to get killed off first when defending, and they have the highest power loss of all the troop tiers. So if you're heavy on T14s, when it comes to the power exchange, that is something that you need to be careful about. As a bit of a guide, when I'm building troops, I try to follow a 4-3-2-1 distribution. And that is 40% of the troops that I'm building will be T12, 30% for T13, 20% for T14, and then 10% for T11. Now, of course, these are not strict numbers, and I do adjust them for certain troop types, depending on what my focus is at that point in time. For example, I might want to build out more T11 siege, or perhaps more T13 mounted troops in a particular batch of troops that I'm building, so I adjust my numbers accordingly. Just take this distribution as a sort of reference point. Also, depending on the kind of army you are building, you might have more focus on one or two specific troop types, whether that be siege, ranged troops, or mounted troops. Your troop distribution will also, to an extent, dictate the type of buffs that you should focus on. So, it is important that you are aware of the distribution of troops that you have. Next up, we're going to talk about troop layering. Aside from your higher troop tiers, you would want to pay attention to building out your lower troop tiers, or layers, as part of your defense. For most people, there will be a lot of focus on building out higher troop tiers, and we're talking about T11s to T14s, as these will form the main force of your defense. But at some point, you will also have to pay attention to building out your layers. Some might wonder, what is the importance of having layers? Layers are important because, essentially, they give the attacking troops more volume to deal with, making it harder for the attack to be as effective as intended. In addition, your layers will chip away at the attacking troops, getting kills and making it a bit easier for your main forces to defend your keep. When it comes to defending, there are two main things that you need to worry about. The first one, naturally, is surviving. And having good layers will significantly increase the chances of you surviving one, if not multiple attacks before you get zeroed. Layers are also very crucial when it comes to surviving rallies. The next thing that you need to worry about is the power exchange. That is, how much power you lose versus how much power the attacker loses. Here, having good layers will help you out a bit with the power exchange, but they will not be critically important. Based on the current game mechanics, and depending on how strong the person attacking you is, you can still lose considerable power even if you have good layers. Now, that being said, it is still important for you to have good layers. And there's a bit of a progression when it comes to building up good layers. You would first want to start off with something simple, like 30,000 troops for all troop types in all tiers up to T10. Then you work your way up to, say, 50,000. After that, 70,000. After that, 100,000, and so on. As a sort of benchmark, for someone at 2 billion power, your layers should be anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million troops in all tiers. If we take a quick look at mine, I'm currently at 1.5 billion, and my layers are at 400,000 going all the way down. So that's something that you can use as a bit of a reference point. Note that layers are not something that you build in one day. So take your time as you make your progression with building out your layers. Finally, while we are on the topic of layers, a lot of people have heard something about the importance of T1 layers for defense. And the word going around is to build a ton of T1 troops. I'm talking millions, like literally millions of T1 troops. Here's my view on this. One of the main purposes of having layers is to add volume to your keep. And in that regard, this strategy of building out a ton of T1 troops actually helps. T1 troops are comparatively cheap to build, so in that sense, they will work pretty well. In addition, in terms of increasing your survivability and reducing the chances of you getting completely zeroed, having a ton of T1 troops will also work well for that. Remember, Evony, while it is a game of buffs, it is also a game of numbers. So, this strategy of bulking up on T1s will actually help in that aspect. However, from all indications that I've seen so far, and that includes my reports and reports from other players that I've seen, having a ton of T1 troops will not significantly help with you winning the power exchange. Your main forces can still get cleared out, leaving you with just layers and a ton of T1s. Personally, I don't feel one way or the other about this T1 strategy. Yes, I admit it has its merits, but from my point of view, focusing on all your layers, not just T1s, would be more helpful. Now, that being said, if you have the time and patience to pump out masses of T1 troops, then that's all good for you. More power to you. Okay, now that we've covered all the main ingredients needed for building a good defense, how do you put them all together? Now, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that people have other priorities when developing in Evony. That may be improving your mounted march for bosses or improving your range march for PvP. When you are working on these, you'd of course be focused on things like getting better gear, improving your refines, growing your dragons. But in the long run, it will be very beneficial to your defense if you also pay attention to universal buffs like research buffs, buffs from the art hall, civilization treasures, those kind of things. Of course, these will help you with the immediate objective of buffing up the march that you're trying to work on, but they will also make sure that your defense buffs are improving in the process. Secondly, and this one is very key, there is something that you should always keep in mind when you are trying to build a good defense. Here it is. While your troops will protect your keep, it is your buffs and your debuffs that will protect your troops. Remember that. So, in most cases, it is more important for you to work on your buffs and your debuffs than it is for you to build out more troops. When you're putting all of this together, to help you out, you can follow one golden rule for building defense. Every time you want to build a significant batch of troops, make sure that you first increase either your buffs or your debuffs, or preferably both. For each batch of troops you build, making sure you increase your buffs and your debuffs will be essential for making sure that your defense develops nicely. For example, say I want my buffs to increase by 5% and I want my ranged troop debuffs to increase by 10% before I build out my next batch of troops. Something like that. If you do it this way, you will have a clear focus and a plan for what you're doing to improve your defense. So, I hope you found the information in this video helpful. And if you have any questions or differing views, please feel free to drop a comment down below. Thank you very much. Aka signing out.